There is something sitting on the ceiling of a 3,000-year-old Egyptian temple that the United States military still cannot fully explain in the 21st century. Not because the stone is old, not because the carving is faded, but because the shape it traces, a disc-like craft, a rotor, a hull, looks like a photograph taken from a Pentagon briefing room, not a pharaoh's sacred wall. And when you dig into what the government actually says about the objects it cannot identify in our own skies today, and then you stand back and look at what somebody etched into limestone at Abydos over 3,000 years ago, the question that emerges is not comfortable. It is not one that the textbooks are prepared to answer. The question is not whether ancient Egyptians had helicopters. The question is whether something else, seen by both the ancient Egyptians and modern military pilots, was real, and it was carved in stone so that whoever came after them would notice. This is Abydos, and what is here should not be possible. The Temple of Seti I sits roughly 300 miles south of Cairo, deep in Upper Egypt, on the west bank of the Nile. Construction began in the reign of Pharaoh Seti I, who ruled from around 1290 to 1279 BCE, placing the temple firmly in the 19th dynasty of ancient Egypt's New Kingdom. His son, Ramesses II, the most powerful pharaoh in Egyptian history, finished what his father started after Seti's death, adding his own inscriptions, filling some sections with plaster, and recarving others in his own name. That detail about the plaster matters enormously. Keep it in mind. The temple itself is extraordinary by any standard. It has a unique, L-shaped floor plan, 7 ceremonial entrances, and 24 papyrus columns. It was dedicated to 6 major deities and to Seti I himself. Inside, one of its most famous chambers is the Gallery of the King List, a long corridor where Seti I and Ramesses II are shown making offerings before the cartouches of 76 of their royal predecessors, tracing a line of legitimate rulership all the way back to the first pharaoh. That list alone is worth hours of study. But none of that is why people keep coming back to Abydos. They come back for a single panel near the top of a lintel in the temple ceiling. A panel that, depending on who you ask, is either a routine case of overlapping administrative inscriptions or one of the most genuinely unsettling images in the ancient world. Here is what the official version says. When Ramesses II took the throne, he did what many Egyptian pharaohs did. He overwrote his predecessor's name with his own. The original hieroglyphs carved during Seti I's reign read roughly, "Powerful of scimitar, who suppresses the 9 enemies of Egypt," followed by Seti's throne name. Ramesses then had the surface smoothed with plaster and recarved a new inscription, claiming the same wall for himself. Over centuries, the plaster eroded away. The result? 2 sets of glyphs, partially merged, bleeding through each other. What you see is not one image. It is 2 images, superimposed by time. That process has a name. Egyptologists call it a palimpsest, and for most scholars, that explanation is complete. Case closed. But here is where it gets uncomfortable. A palimpsest overlapping inscriptions should produce something random. 2 sets of unrelated symbols laid over each other should create noise, meaningless visual clutter. If you wrote the word strength over the word harvest in the same space, you would not expect the result to look like a word in any living language. You would expect visual chaos. What appeared on the ceiling of Abydos does not look like visual chaos. It looks like a helicopter. It looks like a submarine. It looks like a disc-shaped aircraft. And in one corner of the panel, it looks like something that a modern military observer might describe as an orb. Now, before we go any further, let's be honest about something. The palimpsest explanation is real. It is not a cover-up. The actual mechanics of how those shapes formed from overlapping dynasties are documented. Egyptologists, including Bob Breyer, have used enhanced photography to demonstrate the layering. No serious researcher argues that an ancient Egyptian craftsman sat down and deliberately drew a Sikorsky helicopter. The question that is harder to answer is different. The question is this: why do those overlapping symbols, generated by pure administrative accident, create shapes that are visually indistinguishable from craft that the United States military is currently calling unidentified anomalous phenomena and cannot explain, because those craft are real too. Between May 2023 and June 2024 alone, the Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, a body created specifically to investigate UAP sightings from military personnel, received 757 new reports. As of late 2024, the office had a total of 1,652 UAP reports in its holdings. Of the cases reviewed in the most recent reporting period, 21 were flagged as sufficiently anomalous to require deeper investigation. 3 of those reports involved military pilots who described being trailed or shadowed by unidentified objects. The Pentagon's own director of that office confirmed the shape catalogue: orbs, cylinders, triangles, discs, and objects that performed what the report called unusual maneuvers. Orbs, cylinders, discs, unusual maneuvers. Look at the Abydos panel again. The shapes described in Pentagon briefings, the most common being described as small, metallic-looking spheres and disc-type objects that, in the words of multiple observers, tilt and then suddenly fly off. Those shapes have a peculiar resonance with what is carved on that limestone ceiling, not because someone planned it, but because the coincidence sits too close to something to dismiss it cleanly. That is the first layer of the Abydos problem. There is a second layer, and this one is harder for the official story to absorb. If the Temple of Seti I is the face of Abydos, what lies behind it is the brain. And nobody has fully understood the brain. Directly behind the main temple, buried beneath several feet of accumulated earth until it was excavated in 1902 and 1903 by the archaeologists Flinders, Petrie, and Margaret Murray, lies a structure called the Osireion. It is not a temple in any conventional sense. It is not decorated. It contains almost no inscriptions. There are no colorful reliefs, no hymns to the gods, no administrative markings. What it is a massive chamber of raw, unadorned megaliths, enormous granite blocks, placed with precision, without mortar, forming 12 colossal pillars that hold up stone lintels of extraordinary weight. Some of those blocks have been estimated at up to 45 tons each. They were placed with very great care and without mortar. In the center of the chamber, a stone platform rises from what was once a trench filled with dark water, surrounded by the silent ring of granite columns. Look at the Temple of Seti I, next door. Intricate carvings, painted reliefs. Every surface is a statement. Then look at the Osireion. Nothing, just weight and silence and raw stone. The Osireion is built at a significantly lower level than the foundation of Seti's temple, and this matters enormously. If both structures were built in the same era, by the same dynasty, using the same workforce and the same engineering sensibility, you would expect them to sit at the same level. You would expect the same decorative language. You would expect some visual continuity. There is none. The building style of the Osireion does not resemble the 19th dynasty. It resembles something much older. The stark, cyclopean masonry, enormous blocks, fitted together with minimal jointing, no mortar, no relief carving, is the same style found at sites that are considered to be among the most ancient constructed environments on Earth. The valley temples at Giza, certain blocks at Saqqara, structures whose true age is, depending on who you ask, either firmly established or quietly debated at the edges of the academic literature. Mainstream Egyptology attributes the Osireion to Seti I, citing its physical proximity to his temple and some hieroglyphic inscriptions in the connecting passageways. But researchers have pointed out that those attributions are largely based on context rather than hard physical evidence from the chamber itself. No pottery was recovered, no tools, no foundation deposits, no objects from the central hall that could be dated with confidence to Seti's reign. And then there is the erosion. Some geologists, examining the Osireion's massive blocks, have identified marks consistent with exposure to significant rainfall, the kind of intense, prolonged rain that simply does not fall in that part of Egypt today, and has not fallen there in many thousands of years. The last time Upper Egypt experienced that kind of sustained rainfall was during what geologists call the African Humid Period, a climatic window that closed somewhere between 10,000 and 7,000 years ago. If those erosion markers mean what some researchers argue they mean, the Osireion was not built by Seti I. Seti I found it. He built his temple next to it, wrote his name near its entrance, and claimed an already ancient structure as part of his sacred complex, because that was what powerful kings did. If you find something holy and incomprehensible, you don't destroy it. You stand beside it and let people assume you built it. That is a hypothesis. It is not a settled fact, and it is contested by mainstream archaeology, but the absence of datable material from the central chamber, the architectural anomaly of its depth and style, and the weathering patterns on its stones make the hypothesis harder to dismiss than the official silence around it suggests. Here is where it gets really interesting, because the Osireion is not the only structure at Abydos that sits below the expected level. The entire site of Abydos is layered in time in a way that most visitors never understand. The city itself has been continuously occupied and considered sacred since at least the predynastic period, which in Egyptian terms means before 3100 BCE. The earliest royal tombs at Abydos, in a section called el-Kab, meaning the mother of pots, contain the burials of Egypt's very first kings, from the 1st and 2nd dynasties, going back to at least 2900 BCE. Narmer, often cited as the founder of the first dynasty and the pharaoh who first unified Upper and Lower Egypt, is associated with tombs in this area. That means Abydos was a royal necropolis for more than 1,000 years. Before Seti I placed a single foundation stone. Think about what that means for the Osireion. Seti ruled around 1290 BCE. The earliest First Dynasty kings were buried at Abydos around 2900 BCE. That is already a 1600-year gap between the first royal occupation of this site and the pharaoh credited with building the Osireion. And some researchers argue the Osireion predates even those First Dynasty burials. The official story compresses all of this into a tidy package. Seti built the temple, Seti built the Osireion. Ramesses II finished what his father started. Case closed. The data suggests something messier. Something older is here, and something older may have been seen. Now, we come back to the ceiling. This is the point where the two threads of Abydos intersect. The Osireion below ground, silent and heavy and inexplicable, sitting beneath a layer of accumulated history, and the glyphs above ground, in the ceiling of the temple, carrying shapes that make modern Pentagon analysts uncomfortable for entirely different reasons. The official line on the ceiling glyphs is the Palimpsest. 2 pharaohs, 1 wall, and 3,000 years of erosion. The official line on the Pentagon's unresolved UAP cases is that they are anomalous, unattributed, and require further study. Both official lines are saying, in different languages, the same thing. We have shapes in front of us that we cannot fully account for. And here is the genuinely difficult question, not whether the ancient Egyptians had helicopters, not whether aliens visited Seti I. Those are questions designed to be easy to laugh at, and laughing at them lets you avoid the harder version. The harder version is this. Human beings have been observing anomalous objects in the sky for as long as they have been looking up. The objects described in the earliest historical records, disks, spheres, luminous craft that moved against the wind match. In basic morphology, the objects being filed in Pentagon reports today, not in detail, not in technology, in shape, in behavior, in the reaction they produce in the people who observe them. Whatever is being seen now was also being seen then. That is not a theory. That is a pattern in the data that crosses thousands of years and multiple civilizations. The people of Abydos were not primitive. They were building monumental structures in stone with a precision that challenges modern engineers. They were recording celestial events with a mathematical awareness that took European astronomy centuries to catch up to. They were preserving information in stone, in limestone, in granite, in the oldest writing system we know, for exactly this reason. So it would survive. Something was observed, something was preserved. Whether what was preserved at Abydos is an administrative accident, a religious symbol, a deliberate record, or some combination of all three, the shapes on that ceiling have been sitting there for over 3,000 years, waiting for a moment in history when the people looking at them could say, "We have seen these too," and we have. Lay the data points side by side. 1. The Temple of Seti I at Abydos, constructed around 1290 BCE, contains a panel of ceiling carvings that, regardless of their official explanation as overlapping hieroglyphic palimpsests, present visual profiles matching craft shapes that the United States military currently classifies as unresolved UAP, discs, orbs, rotor silhouettes. 2. Behind that same temple, at a significantly lower elevation and in a radically different architectural style, sits the Osireion, a megalithic structure of granite blocks weighing up to 45 tons each, placed without mortar, bearing no decorative inscriptions, and yielding no datable artifacts from its central chamber. Its construction has been attributed to Seti I by proximity, not by direct evidence. 3. Some geological researchers have pointed to erosion patterns on the Osireion's blocks, consistent with a wet climate period that ended thousands of years before Seti I was born, raising the possibility that what Seti found at Abydos was already ancient when he arrived. 4. The Pentagon's own All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, reviewing military reports from 2023 to 2024, has documented 1,652 total UAP cases, with hundreds remaining unresolved, and with pilot testimony describing objects of exactly the morphologies, discs, orbs, cylinders that appear on the Abydos ceiling. 5. At a congressional hearing in November 2024, 4 witnesses testified that the federal government is knowingly withholding UAP-related information from the public. A former Defense Department official testified under oath that, in his assessment, the objects are real, are advanced, and are not made by any government on Earth. Now hold all 5 of those together. The conventional narrative says the Abydos images are a known optical illusion caused by administrative practice. The conventional narrative says the Pentagon's UAP cases are a mixture of drones, balloons, atmospheric effects, and foreign surveillance technology. The conventional narrative says the Osireion is New Kingdom Egyptian, built by Seti, done and dusted. Each of those explanations, on its own, has merit. Each is defensible if you look at only one data point in isolation, but the conventional narrative has never explained why the optical illusion produced by overlapping pharaoh names looks like the craft descriptions in active military files. It has never explained why the most anomalous structure at Abydos sits below ground level, in a different architectural language, with no artifacts to anchor it in time. And it has never reconciled why, across thousands of years of recorded human observation, the shapes that defy explanation stay consistently the same. We think the ancient world was simpler than ours. The data suggests it was observing the same things we are. We think the UAP problem is a modern one, born of advanced technology and geopolitical secrecy. The stone at Abydos suggests someone was paying attention long before the Pentagon existed to be confused by it. And we think the official explanations for the carvings, for the Osireion, for the unresolved aerial cases are satisfying because they are delivered with confidence. But confidence is not the same as completeness. There is a difference between an answer that closes the question and an answer that just makes the question quieter. The question at Abydos has never been quiet. It has been sitting there in limestone, 40 feet above the ground, for more than 3,000 years. It outlasted the dynasty that carved it. It outlasted the empire that surrounded it. It outlasted every explanation that has been offered for it. It is still there. And whatever Seti I's craftsmen saw, or whatever accident of overlapping names and eroding plaster conjured into being the shape on that ceiling, matches what is in the Pentagon's unresolved files today. not metaphorically, not with poetic license. In morphology, in silhouette, in the specific visual language of things that were observed, recorded, and not fully understood. That is not proof of anything. But it is not nothing, either. What is buried beneath the Osireion, and what may have inspired the carvings above it, is a question that Egyptology has not answered, and that the Pentagon, in a different context, is actively trying to answer right now. The two investigations have never been in the same room together. Maybe it is time they were. The next place this channel goes is underground, beneath Abydos, beneath Giza, beneath the official story of how Egypt got started in the first place. Because Abydos doesn't just sit at the center of Egyptian civilization, some researchers argue it sits at the beginning of something even older. The Osireion is not the only structure in Egypt that shouldn't be there. There are others, and they are deeper, stranger, and even harder to explain away. That is where we are going next. If what stands above the ground already troubles the official timeline, wait until you see what's below it.